Okay, so as we've said, we're talking about making education more inclusive. So my name's Jacqui Mattingly. So welcome everybody. I started my career as a teacher and then worked as a special needs advisor in the UK before undertaking some TEFL work, and then for the last 22 years I've been working in international development in education. I've lived and worked in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Indonesia and the Caribbean, and then for the last 9 years I've been doing short-term consultancy work with inputs mainly in Sub-Saharan Africa, although not exclusively. I've still had I've had work in East Asia, in Laos, and again in Indonesia, and also in Tonga, of all places. So I've been around. And most of that work is for the UN agencies or the big donor organizations like DFID, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, and so on. So that's just to put you into the context of me. Sorry, we don't have sufficient time for you to introduce yourselves, but welcome anyway. So the main objectives of this webinar, and there is a limit to what we can do in 90 minutes. So I hope that there'll be something for everybody. So we're going to discuss what inclusion in education means, who can be excluded in the classroom and why, and how to identify and remove the barriers to learning and develop a more inclusive environment. So it will be quite general, I think, but as I say, hopefully some of it may be revision for some of you, just little new reminders about what we need to do, but hopefully there'll be something there for everybody. So we're talking about making education more inclusive. So what do we mean by being more inclusive in education? Can you just take a minute to note down any thoughts you have about what being more inclusive in education means and why it is important? Any quick thoughts? Just do some quick jottings there for a moment. Everybody had time to think? Yes. Okay. Does anybody like to share what they've jotted down at all? Please feel free. What do we mean by being more inclusive in education, and why do we think it's important?
I think we've got some good points in the chat box.
Oh, sorry, I've lost the chat box now I'm sharing.
Yeah, if you go up to your top bar, you should have, it should come up and there should be dot, 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 and you should be able to choose chat.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Oh. Got it. Okay, so we've got having education available to everyone. Yes. A safe environment. Very good. Students taking part in lessons, not just hearing and talking. That's very important. including all the students of the class in the lesson procedure. That's really important. And also the active participation of all children in the lesson. Yes, it's really important that we make sure that it's not only about access, but it's about participation and achievement. So being more inclusive in education means ensuring everyone can access, participate and achieve in education on an equal basis, irrespective of their individual differences or characteristics. So this was this goes back to 1948, in fact, when the right to education was enshrined as a human right in the Convention of Human Rights back in 1948. Since then, various other conventions and treaties have been agreed, including the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Somebody mentioned the children in the chat just back there. That was a UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, was 1989. And more recently, in 2006, the Convention on the Rights of People with Disability. So that's still quite relatively recent. In addition, the Sustainable Development Goals were set in 2015 and go through to 2030. There are 17 goals, and goal 4 is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning. So there's lots of international agreements, but there remains a lot of children in particular who remain out of school or who really aren't participating in the learning process. And I guess that goes for adults too. Particularly children and youths, there remain many, and we'll talk about the particular specific groups in a moment. So just to kind of set the scene, I've got this a cartoon here which shows inequality, where we can see quite clearly unequal access to opportunities. So somebody there's getting all the apples or whatever they may be coming off the tree, and on the other side we can see not much is happening. So equality is then achieved by providing evenly distributed tools and assistance. So we make the playing field a little bit more equal. We then think about equity, where we custom the tools that identify and address inequality. So if we can't reach the apples, then we provide a larger ladder in order to level up the playing field. However, that still doesn't really make an equal chance or a level playing field. So we actually need to fix the system to offer equal access to both tools and opportunities. And there we can see that's justice in this depiction, where we've actually got both equal access and equal provided by equal tools and opportunities. So it's not really about it's not really about finding the difficulties, but it's about learning, overcoming and removing the barriers to learning. And we all learn in different ways, so that's really important to remember. I'm sorry, I'm having a bit of difficulty getting the chat lines. Has anybody got anything that they want to say before we move on? Still can't quite. Here we go. Okay, anybody got anything to comment on that? No, good. Okay. Oh, sorry. So barriers to education. These are general barriers that frequently exclude particularly children and young people from education around the world. So barriers are often caused by attitudes, stereotyping and discrimination, which prevails in every society, and different groups of people may be discriminated against, or there'll be certain attitudes to them. We may not actually really be aware that we have those attitudes and within us, but that's part of our socialization, so we do. However, barriers to education are often caused by geographical location. It's usually that may be that there's no school in remote locations, or children have further to travel to get to school, or the terrain is difficult, all kinds of reasons for geographical location. Socioeconomic status. The more wealthy background you come from and the higher status that you come from, you usually, there's a tendency to have better learning outcomes than the poorer groups. And in many countries, poorer groups do not have very limited enrollment in education. So poverty is obviously a big issue, and then that also hunger also impacts on whether you go to school or not. People with disabilities have consistently been excluded from educational opportunities. People with mental health issues, including those suffering trauma and stress, chronic health problems and illness, being part of a mobile population, such as pastoralists, nomadic people, displaced people, and refugees. So you're already working with people who may be excluded from normal educational opportunities. Gender norms and attitudes can impact on a person's access and to participate, including early marriage and early parenting, which I'll talk about a bit further later on. And then there are children who are left without parental guidance, which may be because they've been orphaned, or it may be because the parents have had to move away in order to seek work. So they're the key kind of barriers to education around the world. They're not necessarily impact in your situation, but you may want to remember that not everybody will be coming with the same, having had the same chances. So some of these things may have impacted on your students' ability to participate in education. So becoming more inclusive involves these four interrelated issues. So in order to become more inclusive, we need to create an inclusive culture. We need to develop inclusive practices. We need to ensure an enabling environment, and then within all of that, obviously, we need to deliver inclusive quality education. So creating an inclusive culture means that society, communities and schools all work towards reducing discrimination and challenging discriminatory attitudes and developing inclusive attitudes to support the inclusion of all. Support from developing inclusive practices then means that everybody within a system or an organization understands that we need to develop inclusive practices. They need to understand what that might look like and be able to support teachers to deliver. So quite often in an education system, there are lots of officials who have various roles, and they quite often don't understand that their role is principally there in order to enable learning. So we need to always have the learner at the heart, and teachers can't be expected to deliver alone. They need support in order to be able to do that. And teachers themselves need to be develop reflective practice and review their practice to continually improve and develop their pedagogical skills. So we need to ensure an enabling environment by providing a supportive legal and policy framework that enables everybody to be able to access and participate in education, and also to provide a safe, accessible environment. Some of you have already mentioned that in the earlier thing where we were thinking about what it means. It's really important that the environment is safe and accessible, but also that learners feel safe and secure in order to make mistakes that enable learning. We learn mostly from making mistakes, so we need to feel safe to do that. And then finally, we need to deliver inclusive quality education, which where different learning needs are identified and accommodated to ensure participation and achievement in the learning process. So this isn't about labeling, it's not about identifying particular disabilities or learning difficulties necessarily, but just to be aware that diversity and difference it means that we all learn in different ways, and we need to therefore provide as big a variety of opportunity to learn as we possibly can. Anyone got any questions? Feel free just to chip in, unmute your mic and chip in. Don't be scared. Okay. So inclusive education then means, let's get down to the teaching part. Teachers have a responsibility to identify and reduce the barriers that may lead to exclusion, both within and from education. So that's both within the classroom, but also to look at the factors that might exclude people from actually accessing and then coming to the class. Respond positively to diversity and difference. we need to aim to meet the needs of all learners through an ongoing process of quality improvement in teaching and learning, and therefore ensure the full participation and achievement of all learners. It's quite easy sometimes to think that you've taught something and that therefore everybody has learnt it, but that is not the case at all. We can see from any kind of test figures or a check of learning outcomes that what is taught is not necessarily learned, and I'll be stressing that as we go through, and we'll be talking about it in a lot more detail. So we've had a bit of an introduction to what becoming more inclusive means. Can you just jot down what you think are the main challenges to you in becoming more inclusive in your classes? What do you think are the main problems that you may face if you're going to be more inclusive?
We've got some nice comments coming through on the chat.
Yeah, I've finally managed to get it to behave itself. Well, it's probably me, actually. I can't say I've changed the chat thing, but I can now see it at least. Okay, great. I can see we've got quite a few different things that you think are challenging, but hopefully we'll cover as we go through. And yes, certainly okay, there's still more coming in. I'll just wait for a moment. Okay, so I can see that there's the constant changes in the student population makes it very difficult. Not only, I would imagine, that doesn't only impact on the learning, but just getting to know the students and their levels means can make it very difficult when you just got getting to know them and then they move on. Appreciate that. And language barriers can be really, really difficult when you've got mixed languages in the same class. And also somebody's mentioned there the access of women. Just trying to find it again. Yeah, mixed classes sometimes exclude women. That's quite common around the world. And that's what we'll be moving. We're going to move on to talk about gender in the next immediate next thing. Also resources and other things. So going forward from here, I'm going to look at quickly have a look at some gender issues, and then the environment, and then after that some simple techniques that can help to overcome some of these difficulties that we're all facing. So hopefully we will address some of, give you some food for thought. Anyway, I don't think we can address everything in 90 minutes. There's whole libraries about this. So yeah, okay, moving on then. So gender norms and attitudes particularly can mean women and girls are prevented from enrolling or transitioning through the education sectors. This is in cultures where women and girls are seen to be less equal, shall we say, than men or boys. They're not provided equal opportunities to access resources, not encouraged to actively participate as much as the men or boys. They may be forced to leave school early to get married, and they may be subjected to gender-based violence. So these are the common causes for gender inequality in educational opportunity. Whilst women and girls around the world are tend to have fewer opportunities to access, stay in, and succeed in education or take up leadership roles, in some countries, boys tend to drop out early due to pressure to support family income or peer pressure. So there are different cultures. The gender bias is different. Different cultures have different attitudes, and these will be reflected in the attitudes and behaviour of your students. They may not even be aware that they have been socialised to behave in a certain way and have different attitudes towards each other. So this is something that is, gender is something that it comes from the society in which you live. And so we just need to be aware of that. So, but if we're talking about older girls and women, they will have been socialized to behave in certain ways, as will the boys and the men been socialized to behave in a certain way towards them. So it's, whilst we need to make sure that we have gender equality by making sure both female and male students have equal opportunities, we also need to be aware of the cultural sensitivities of the students. So, for example, female and male students may not be comfortable sitting together, for example. But you can make sure your class is fair to both sexes, and you can challenge any discriminatory behaviour, which may lead to gender transformative behaviour in the end. So by making people aware of the differences between the way that female and males are, the difference in behaviour towards those and attitudes, we can start to break down some of the things, but just without challenging any discriminatory behaviour, you can make sure that both female and male students have equal space in the class. The students themselves may not realise, but quite often boys are given much more space in the class to sit than the girls. I've been in classes around the world where there's an equal number of boys and girls, and the boys take up 2/3 of the seating space, and the girls are all crammed in on one side, all squashed in together. So also make sure that both female and male students have equal opportunities to speak in class. Boys do tend to dominate, and that's true, I think, in pretty much most societies. Make sure that they have equal access to technology or other learning materials, books, or whatever equipment that you are using. Obviously, that doesn't extend to personal things, but anything that's being used within the class. Make sure, quite often female students won't come forward to lead a group if you're doing any group work, so make sure that there are opportunities for them to do so. Don't let the boys or men take over. And also they need equal opportunity to participate in all activities and are encouraged to do so. So encourage the women and girls to participate in anything out of class and other activities that are going on. And then just check the resources that you're using and check that there's equal representation of females and males in those resources, and that males and females are not depicted in stereotypical roles. You need try to find resources that show women doing non-typically female roles, and vice versa. And the males, you know, we can have males sweeping the floor and males cooking the dinner, and those typical female roles. Okay, anyone got anything that they want to? Oh, sorry, before we move on, has anyone got anything they want to say?
I think maybe a point that came up earlier was that although we want women and girls to speak, give them an opportunity to speak in class, often they won't take that opportunity. So how do you encourage them to take it?
Okay, good point. I think if they've been socialized not to speak in class, then maybe by speaking to them one-to-one before or after the class and building confidence is really important. And then build up from there. I'm aware that sometimes the students may move on before you've had an opportunity to actually do that, but also, I mean, it does depend a bit on the situation, but if they are too shy to speak out in class, then maybe have some group work or pair work where two women or girls can work together and then feed back to the class. Safety in numbers sometimes helps, but build up confidence slowly, and make them aware that they are, you know, give a lot of praise and make them aware that their thoughts and ideas are just as good as the males. Especially where they've been used to being second fiddle, so to speak. Is that okay? Anything more about gender equality? It is quite a tricky thing where we do need to be aware of their own cultural sensitivities as well. So not breaking their kind of traditional roles is is also important. So recognizing that they may not feel comfortable to speak in class, but pointing, maybe have a session where you can explain the reasons why it's important to speak in class, and also to practice speaking may also be helpful. We do need to be a bit careful with gender sensitivity. Okay, well, I'm not going to be able to go into any more detail on that at the moment. We're going to move on now to think about making the environment more inclusive. Now, these points are not only relevant for wheelchair users. As soon as we talk about making the environment more inclusive, everyone always seems to think, oh, we need to think about how a wheelchair can access. But there are other groups or other students who may have difficulty in accessing the classroom. Those who have difficulty in walking, may have a limp, may have crutches, maybe, or may just have general mobility difficulties, that is, difficulty generally moving about. They may be a bit awkward. They may just be getting old like me, whatever. And also those who cannot see very well. It's extremely difficult if you can't see very well to move around in difficult terrain. So it is really important. So yeah, I stress these are not only relevant for wheelchair users, and having access pathways for people with disabilities is not it's not necessary. The pathways can be used by everyone. If they're accessible for people with disabilities, then they're accessible for everyone. We don't need a special way in for certain groups. So if you are thinking about how to make the environment more inclusive, then ramps are much more accessible than steps for everyone. And if possible, replace steps with a ramp in a ratio of no more than 1 to 12. 1 to 12 is getting a bit steep. And that means a 12 centimetre in length for every 1 centimetre increase in height. I hope you don't have too many questions about that, because I'm not an engineer, but it's quite a shallow ramp. So I once had somebody where I was working to increase the access in schools in Bangladesh, and we were setting the standards, and I had to go to the chief engineer's office who builds schools, and he said he had that the ramp ratio should be much greater than this, and I said, but that's going to make it very, very difficult for people to be able to walk on it. And he said, it's all right, it's only for small boys. So that stuck in my mind for a very long time. They're not only for small boys. And if you've probably seen steep ramps around that make it really difficult for walking, and make it even more difficult even for an able-bodied person to access. So make sure the ramp, if you're going to put ramps, but where there's a small step up into a classroom, you can easily make a ramp out of pieces of wood or even mud, things that are just around, and try to just bear in mind that it's about a ratio of 1 to 12 is what we're looking for. So other simple things we can do is make sure pathways are smooth and kept clear of any debris. If we can mark the edges of any steps with yellow tape or white tape or a really contrasting colour, that really helps to be able to see the edges of the steps, especially for people who have any difficulty with vision. Yeah, mark the edges of steps. That can just be sticky tape. Mark the or paint, in fact. Mark the edges of paths or boundaries with stones, and again painted yellow or in a contrasting colour, or if you can find any, even traffic cones are quite helpful to mark the edges of paths, or again tape or paint yellow lines on them to guide users to the entrances. Cover any drains or open holes and make sure there are no hanging signs or windows opening out onto paths, especially if people have are moving around a lower level, so people in wheelchairs or people again with visual difficulties. If there's a hanging sign or windows opening out onto pathways, they don't know they're there. So if there are hanging signs or windows onto the paths, just warn the learners that this is the case. If there are any changes to the layout that they're used to, explain them thoroughly to all the learners, and then walk any learners with mobility or sensory impairments through so they know where things are. So that's sensory impairments, in case that's confusing, would be visual impairments in particular. So here's an example of a ramp. That's a pre-made manufactured one that's quite cheap to buy, but if we're up just a small step into a doorway, any ramps need to have a smooth entry and exit point. So make sure that there's no gap between the bottom of the ramp and the path, and that there's a gradual kind of entry onto the ramp and also exit, obviously. Sometimes I've seen ramps that don't really go anywhere because there's a ramp up a step, but there's no path beyond it. So that's also need to be aware of that. And I'm sure the staircase, you can see having decent lighting also helps, but the edges, marking the edges of steps really helps people to be able to know where the steps are. The other thing in this picture is the provision of handrails as well. So if you do have steps, consider putting handrails. Make sure they're very firm, which can also help to access. Okay. So here's a picture of some work in progress, and I'd just like you to note down what you think is good and bad in terms of accessibility in this picture, if there's anything good or if there's anything bad. Have we got any? Got any thoughts, anybody?
It looks more like an obstacle course than an accessible area.
Right. Yes, that's a good point. Yes, it does. But this is quite frequently the type of thing. So I'll just show you. So the drain has been covered to allow access across it. So that's something very good. But there's still a step onto the side of the drain to get onto to get over it, which hasn't been ramped or marked. If the edge of the edge of the wall of the drain had been marked, that would be helpful, or a ramp provided. The way ahead after that has a concrete, well, some concrete surface, but it's not smooth by any stretch of the imagination. And then finally, yes, there's also a step up into the building where the men are standing. There's an access into the shop there. So yeah, these are all things just to consider in terms of accessibility into a class. So these obstacles would actually prevent some people from actually managing to get into the classroom before we even think about what they're going to learn when they're in there. So they are important things to do. And in fact, that drain cover had been provided by a community project so people were aware that there were issues, but yeah, they still need to consider some of the other factors as well. Okay, so moving on again. So thinking now about inside the classroom, making the actual classroom more inclusive. So learners should be able to move easily and safely in the classroom. So make sure the floor is kept clear, and trip hazards, any trip hazards like wires and cables, are taped down so that people can't trip over them. If we tape them down, it means they can't trip. So all learners should be positioned so that they can see and hear with minimal distractions. This should also take into account their own preferences, especially some students may have visual or hearing difficulties that are undetected, but they will know where they see or hear the best in the classroom. So if we move them around, their preferences may not be taken into account. So just be a bit careful with repositioning students, where we've just spoken about gender issues, but making sure that if somebody can't hear very well or can't see very well, that they sit where they feel the most comfortable. And many hearing and visual difficulties, I'm not talking about completely blind or completely deaf people. I'm talking about if any kind of minor difficulty with hearing or seeing, And if we often don't know that we have, if we've always had it, we don't always know that we have a difficulty. And many of your students may have a minor visual or hearing difficulty that could be better if they had glasses or even a hearing aid. But if they're undetected, then they will continue to have it. For example, I wear glasses, and without them, I am quite seriously, I have visual difficulties. So if my difficulty hadn't been identified, I too would have a visual difficulty. So I'm aware glasses get lost and broken, and people who are moving around don't always have a chance to replace them if they've been issued in the first place. So in many developing countries, there's no access to those kind of services. So do be particularly aware of any difficulties with vision and hearing. So also making the classroom more inclusive, if possible, place tables so that all the learners can work in groups to collaborate and discuss together. So rather than always sitting facing the front, place the tables if possible so that they can work in groups. It's really important that learning is collaborative and that they have opportunities to discuss together. And then keep the most commonly utilised classroom materials in the most accessible spaces, and give regard to height, especially if there is a wheelchair user in the class. Quite often, if there is a wheelchair user, they're forgotten because all the resources are on shelves that are too high for them to reach. We can all access things from a lower level, but a wheelchair user cannot access things from a higher level. So if you do have a wheelchair user, just think about that. But if there's things that you need your learners to access on a regular basis, just make sure they're in the most accessible spaces in the room. Okay, so as I've said, we are all very different, and we all learn in different ways, and we all have different learning preferences. So just think of something you learned well. It might be something you learned in school, but it might be something more recent. It might be something you learned if you've recently learned to cook something, or you've learned to drive, or whatever, anything that you have learned that you think you learned well. Just make a note what it was, and then think about how you learned it and why you think you were successful.
I think it would be really nice to hear some voices. So if anybody's willing to share what they've learned by raising their voice, unmuting themselves, it'd be nice to hear from you.
I'd love to hear some voices, because I feel like I'm talking to myself here. It's always a bit spooky when everyone's on mute.
Yeah.
Okay, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I already sent in my answer, but I put swimming. So not only did I learn to swim this way, but so did my children. Actively learning, prolonged practice. We were all motivated to learn, and there was a real world reason to learn. So we knew it was worth all the efforts that we put into it.
Excellent. Thank you very much for sharing that. That's a really good example. So learning to swim. Anybody else got something that they thought they learned well? Maybe something, even if it's something you did in school way back.
So I'm about to take on a new role at work. So I haven't learnt it yet, but I know already that I am going to have to do some self-study first, and then I'm going to have to watch somebody else do the job, and then I'm going to have to get them to watch me do the job. So practice.
Excellent. Okay, so that's a slightly different different approach. Good. Anybody got anything more? Okay, well, we'll just leave that there for a moment, because now I'd like you to think of something that you did not learn very well and note down what made it difficult and why you think you didn't learn it very well. And I'll then share my chemistry experience. Okay, anybody got anything they want to share about something they did not learn well? This isn't a shaming exercise. It's just an opportunity to really think about why you, what did you learn well, and why that happened, and then why you think you didn't learn something well. Okay, anyone got anything to share?
Kerry has written that she didn't learn the American Sign Language very well for an online course.
Yeah, so I thought I would be brave, and I said I put all this extra time, but I don't think everything can be learned online. So it sounded like a great idea, but again, you don't have the practice, although you may be motivated. It was really hard to do it on my own, and there was just too much information and just timing as well. It was a 1-month course, and it was stressful. So
Okay.
definitely more time, more practice, someone else to do it with would have been a lot more helpful.
Okay, that's a very good example. And yeah, self-study and online things can be really, really difficult, and they're difficult to motivate yourself as well. Good. Anybody got anything else? Okay, so when I was in school, I was terrible at chemistry, but I mean, and I really regret it now, but I just didn't pay attention. I didn't really bother following the lessons. I was a really, really, really worst student on the planet. But thinking about it, I think that one of my main problems was the way it was being presented, and also I think there was a personality clash with the teacher. So I think that we need, as teachers, we need to be aware that some students aren't going to like us very much. and vice versa, but also that we need to be aware of that. And this chemistry teacher would always present the lesson in exactly the same way. So it was very, if you didn't get on with the way it was being presented, then you didn't really stand a chance. So I'll talk about making sure that we use a variety of techniques and resources and so on later. So what we can see from this is that Carrie's example of what she learned well, she learned well because she was actively learning, she said. So learning swimming, she was very motivated to do it. Whereas with the online learning sign language online, she was finding it very difficult because she was on her own. She didn't have anyone to practice with. So that whole kind of being active and practicing is really important. But some people will learn really well just from reading. Other people will need to make notes. Other people will prefer to listen. And so some people are very visual. They like pictures and diagrams. So my partner, for example, will always, if somebody's talking, he'll just draw a diagram instead of taking notes. He just thinks very visually, where I tend to think a bit verbally. So I will make notes in words rather than in pictures. So we just need to be aware that we all do learn in different ways, and that if we always teach in the same way, a certain percentage of the class will not be participating. They will not be engaged in the learning. So that's why it's really important that we do get to know our students and use some of their learning preferences. But again, they also need to learn to not always learn in the same way. So providing a variety is really important. Good. So we're going to play a game now. So I hope everybody out there is going to join in. But first of all, I'd just like you to look at these words. So we've got, I hope these are unfamiliar to you. We've got dua, tola, ono, vitu, walu, and siwa. I'll just say them again. Dua, tola, ono, vitu, walu, siwa. So just quickly make a 6 square grid like that on your paper, please. I'm assuming you've all got a pencil and a bit of paper to hand. You can do, oh, well done, Kerry. Just a quick rough sketch. Okay, everybody got that? Now,
and we just need to explain the instructions again, please.
Okay, the instructions. So just draw a grid like this table here. So you need a table with 6 boxes. Doesn't need to be straight lines, just a quick sketch with 6 boxes. Everybody got that? Yep. Okay, when you've got your 6 boxes, just put a cross through 2 of them. Any 2, your choice. Okay. Can anyone remember any of the words from the previous slide? If you can, please shout it out.
Oh no,
Very good. Ono was one of them.
that's it. That's the only one I can remember.
That's impressive.
Dua.
I didn't expect anyone to remember any of them, so don't be alarmed. But
We have dua also among the words.
you, on the words, yes, we had dua. Good.
Dua.
Well done. Dua. Right. Well done. You are impressive. You lot. Whew. Okay. So I'm just going to go back to those words. So we did have dua and we did have ono. We also had tola, vitu, walu, and siwa. What I want you to do now is choose 4 of those and write them in the remaining 4 boxes that you've got. Your choice of which 4, any that you fancy the name of. Okay. Has everybody now got a full grid? You should have a word, 4 words in 4 of the boxes and crosses in 2 of the remaining ones. Yes, I can see some nods. Good. Everybody okay? Right. I'll just tell you, these are Fijian numbers in the Fijian language, which I hoped we wouldn't have any fluent Fijian speakers in the group. And so dua is actually number 1, tola is number 3, ono is 6, and then 7, 8, 9 is vitu, walu, and siwa. Okay, so I'll just go back to the table. So we're going to play bingo now. Okay, so I'm going to call out those words in random order. And if you've written the word that I call, you cross it out. And the first person to have 6 boxes crossed must shout bingo. So you will need to have your finger on the mute button so you can unmute yourself when you've got it, because there may be more than one person who gets at the same time. And to win this game, you need to be the first to shout. Okay. Are we ready? So, tola.
Bingo.
No, sorry, put a cross through that word, and now wait until you have all 6 boxes crossed. Okay, that's very good though. You did the right thing. You shouted bingo. That's exactly what you do, but you have to wait until you've got 6 crosses. Okay. Okay, so the first word was tola. Put a cross through that box. If you haven't got tola, just wait. The next word, siwa. Siwa. If you have siwa, you may cross it. Next, walu. Walu. Put a cross through Walu if you have written it. Next, we have Dua. Dua. Okay, has anyone got
Bingo.
six? Okay, Kerry, well done. So Kerry has now got, she's been very lucky.
Yeah.
She has all 6 boxes crossed. Okay, so well done, Kerry, you're the winner. We'll just continue because I can see some people are very waiting there for their words to come up. So the next one is B2.
Bingo.
Bingo. Okay, anyone else got bingo out there? Okay, and finally we have Ono.
Now bingo.
Hooray, well done. Okay. Okay, so that will hopefully prove a point later. But I hope you enjoyed playing the game, and I hope that you can see that by having some simple interactive games, it makes things a bit lighter. So research shows that we remember 10% of what we read, 15% of what we hear, 20% of what we see, hear and touch, 70% of what we discuss, 80% of what we use and do, that's applying our knowledge, and 95% when we teach someone else. So we can see that in the classroom, if we rely on reading and hearing, we're not going, the students are not going to remember very much. Okay, so can I just ask you, without looking at your grid, how many words do you think you could remember now from those 6 words? Can anyone remember any of the words?
Ono, Tola, Walu, Siwa, Dua.
Brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. Well done. Well done.
These are the
George.
words I remember. Thank you so much.
Very, very good. So I think you remembered the words better having played the game than when I just showed you them and you heard them.
Indeed, that's correct.
Yeah, and it's something that we quite often forget when we're teaching people who have different languages. They're not necessarily familiar with the vocabulary, and we're just randomly we don't know if they actually know the vocabulary that we're using. So that was just to highlight how important it is that we don't just expect people can see or hear new words and remember them immediately. We need a lot of time to practice and to become familiar with the words. It also highlights that knowing the background of the words help, what's the function of the words, also helps us to remember. I'm expecting that you will remember a little bit better because I told you that they were the Fijian numbers rather than just random words. but it's very easy to fall into a trap where we just are using new vocabulary and we expect students to remember them. It's actually really, really difficult. So we can, hopefully then some others of you will have remembered some of them better, and that emphasizes some of these that we need to actually use and do, or to actually play with the words in order for it to become familiar. So that was just a little aside from the from the real thing. So well done. So just to emphasize that, what I said earlier, what is taught is not what is learned. And we all learn in different ways, and we all take away different things from a class. So this cartoon is highlights that. So there's the boy here says, I taught Stripe, Stripe is his dog, how to whistle. I taught Stripe how to whistle. So his friend says, I don't hear him whistling. And he says, I said I taught him. I didn't say he learned it. So remember, if any learner is not learning what is expected, we need to try a different approach. We will always be able to learn. It's just that maybe the approach isn't helpful to us. So we need to always be creative, try a new approach. Okay, everybody okay? Still awake out there? Good. Good. So, thinking now about more specific difficulties in learning, there are really just 4 broad types of difficulties in learning, and these fall into communication and interaction difficulties, sensory or physical impairments, behavioural, emotional and social difficulties, and cognitive and learning difficulties. Whilst we need to be aware of any specific needs around these, and I'll explain that a bit further in a moment, labelling is not necessarily helpful, as it tends to categorise people by their limitations. But all learners with a hearing difficulty, for example, do not all have the same problems. They too will learn in different ways. So we need to focus on what a learner can do and understand how each one learns and provide opportunities for them to do so. So just to go back to the list, communication and interaction difficulties will include any speech and language difficulties, but specifically in their mother tongue, not talking about second language learning difficulties. So this includes processing language and the actual physical process of delivering language. And in understanding as well. Some of these can be autistic characteristics for people who are on the autistic spectrum, but it's not only limited to that. It tends to be more speech and language difficulties in actually forming the language and communicating. Sensory or physical impairment includes hearing and vision difficulties, obviously. And as I've said before, many people in developing countries have undetected difficulties because of lack of the clinical or medical professions, and also the cost of glasses. So lack of glasses can mean people do not know they have a difficulty. They've always had that difficulty, so they may not actually realise that they have it. And that's the same with hearing. We need to be very aware of poor eyesight and hearing difficulties, because they can easily be confused with being slow in learning. So just be aware that if somebody is always last, for example, or doesn't respond very well, or as expected, it may be because they've got a difficulty with hearing. And all of these difficulties are on a spectrum, so they go from mild through to moderate through to very severe. So it's not a single item. It's actually a whole spectrum. Behavior, emotional and social difficulties include poor concentration, trauma, diagnosable conditions such as ADHD, and again, some of the autistic spectrum characteristics would come into that. And then cognitive and learning difficulties include specific difficulties with reading, writing, and mathematical concepts. So that includes dyslexia and dyscalculia, but not limited only to that, and again as a spectrum. So we need just to be aware of these. We're going to talk in a few moments about things that we can do to help overcome some of these difficulties. But I do stress that we need to focus on what learners can do and understand how each learner learns, because each learner will present differently, and some learners who may have a diagnosed condition won't necessarily relate to that. So it can be, we just need to find the best way that those learners can learn and help them, and especially in conditions where there may not be any diagnosis. We do need to be aware of which learners are having difficulty in learning and then try to find out why. So
Jacqui, I'm just going to jump in there and say it's 5:30. So if people need to jump off the call because I've got something else to do, that's absolutely fine, because it's only meant to be 90 minutes. But for anyone that can stay and continue the webinar, obviously that's fine as well. So don't feel guilty if you have to jump off the call. Just wanted to say that.
Yeah, sorry, I've overrun. I didn't realise the time at all. Once I get going, yeah, sorry about that. I'll just quickly talk through the slide then. There's just a few more slides, so I'll finish within the next 10 minutes anyway, okay? So general strategies for removing barriers to learning are to accept all learners on an equal basis and do not tolerate any discrimination in your class at all. Learn your learners' names and use them to ask individuals to respond or contribute. Establish a supportive relationship. Create a safe environment for success, and plan lessons to ensure each step of learning builds on the previous learning. I know that's particularly difficult in your context, but if we can identify what we're trying to, if we've got clear learning objectives, then we can build on those as well. So give time for learners to think about forming a response to a question before asking anyone to answer. So there's always somebody who always knows, yes, me, but do give time for people to think about forming a response. It allows for slower learners to be able to raise their hands to answer. And also people who may be struggling with the language, they may have to form the answer more slowly. So just give some time before you allow always the same people to answer. And linked to that is to make sure as many learners as possible have opportunities to respond to questions or contribute in class. So don't allow anyone to dominate. Give all learners plenty of praise and encouragement. Again, I've stressed this all the way through. Provide a wide variety of learning experiences. Set clear and realistic learning targets with the learners. Provide any learners that have been absent with the content they have missed. This is quite a common thing to forget. When people have missed a few classes, we just carry on, but they actually need to know what they've missed. So make sure that that happens. So thinking about those groups of learners who have difficulties, what can a teacher do to increase the inclusion of all learners? So we can minimize background noise. So if it's very noisy outside, I know it's difficult if it's very hot, but maybe shut the windows, shut the doors, and minimize background noise. That makes it easier for those with difficulty in hearing, but it also makes it easier for everyone to listen and concentrate. And people with it also then helps those who've got poor concentration and so on. So just simple things. So I was going to ask you to identify who benefits from these things, but bearing in mind the time, I'll just quickly run through these. So ensure all learners can see your face when you're speaking. It's very easy when we're busy in the classroom and we might be making notes on a board or whatever. But when we're speaking, it's really important that learners can see your face, and that helps those with difficulty in hearing again, and also difficulty with language of instruction. They'll pick up from gestures and your facial expressions and so on, as well as the actual words. Present material using text and speech simultaneously. So read aloud anything that you write. And that helps those who have difficulty seeing or hearing. If you can't see very well, it makes it difficult to read. And if you can't hear very well, it's better if you read. So if we've got both, it helps those groups of learners. Also helps those with difficulty with language of instruction. And of course, also poorer readers. If they're struggling to read the text and you speak it out loud, it means they don't have to struggle to keep up. And they are quite often left behind while they're still struggling to read something and listen to the next thing. So make sure that material is always presented using both text and speech. Use simple language and keep to the point. This benefits the least able. benefits those with difficulty in hearing and those with difficulties with language of instruction. Generally helps for everyone. So asking questions of varying degrees of complexity makes sure that both the most able and the least able learners are included, and that everyone can therefore participate. If you can, partner learners to read and discuss introductory texts together. This will help the most able and least able learners. Those with difficulty with the language of instruction again, poorer readers, and also those with difficulty in vision or seeing, because they won't have to struggle to read the text. So learners can help each other in a kind of symbiotic relationship. Plan learning in small stages and keep the tasks short. This will help those with difficulty with concentration or memory, and also obviously those who are struggling with the language. So by keeping it into small stages and keeping tasks short, they don't have to remember a lot of instructions, or also a lot of content. Use visual clues to assist your speech. Emphasize keywords, use body language, mime actions, use pictures and diagrams, and so on. And that helps difficulty with learning, difficulties with language, the least able, and it also makes it much more interesting for everyone. Okay, so they're simple strategies that if we can incorporate them into the classroom routine, you can help make it easier for everyone to learn. And at the same time, they're obviously helpful to specific groups. So as I've said, it's important to provide variety in the methods used to present new content, the activities or methods for teaching and learning, the actual content of the lesson, and then also the types of assessment that we use to monitor progress in learning. By using a variety of those things, we'll cover more of our class. So this includes providing variety in grouping. You can do that by whole class, small group, pairs, or individual. Variety in teaching learning materials. You can use the board, text, objects, partners, teachers, the teacher, picture or diagram, instrument or other material. Language skills, make sure you cover listening, speaking, reading and writing. Different activities, I won't read out the whole list, but make sure that you use a variety, and also in types of assessment. Finally, inclusive teaching requires getting to know the learners, their level of learning, their interests, preferences, abilities, and experiences. Careful planning to ensure each step of learning builds on that previously learned. A recognition that what is taught is not what is learned. We've talked about that quite a bit. And continual development of teaching skills over time. And that's really important. If something doesn't work, try something else. Next time, try something different. So thank you very much. I'm sorry I didn't manage it in the 90 minutes. I was worried it would go too quickly. But I'm okay for a few more minutes. If anybody has got any further questions at all, then please feel free.
I have one quick question, if I may ask.
Try me. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, I have one scenario in my class. I have one student who always ask another student whatever I say to help her translate in her native language. And so I feel like the student doesn't focus on me as the teacher, but focuses on her colleagues. So I don't know if this helps this topic, this situation in my class help uh, the inclusion of the students in the class on, or it takes away the students from the class.
Yeah. Without knowing the student, that's quite difficult. But it may be that she's very that she's lacking confidence. So she's always, or it may be that she's not sure that she's understood you. So she's asking for a translation from her peers, her friends, to just to make sure that she's understood you. It may be without, as I say, without knowing the situation, don't want to make the situation worse, but it may be a good idea just if you could ask her if she does understand you, and if she has a problem with the language, perhaps. I don't know.
I think she understands perfectly well what I say, but I believe she doesn't have belief in herself, because sometimes when I give them like exercises to do, she sometimes knows the right answers, but she still asks. And so I don't know how to help with this situation in the class.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds as if then it's more to do with confidence rather than to do with ability in the language. So could you perhaps think about how to improve her confidence by perhaps do you do group work sometimes?
Yeah, we do group work, and
And
I sometimes group the advanced learners together, and sometimes I mix them with the beginners, the advanced learners and the beginners together, in order to make them help each other. But when I have this group all by themselves, they lack the self-confidence, and so I don't know if their focus moves away from the teacher to their colleagues.
right. I think that if they're lacking in confidence, then they're going to fall back on their colleagues and friends to kind of support them. But do you ever have like a group leader? Would it be an idea if you could maybe ask her if she could be the group leader sometimes, and just slowly build up that confidence and show her that she actually is able to do things without her friend, without falling back on the friends. Or if she's one of the more able learners, you could pair her with a less able student, so that she actually has to support them rather than being reliant on somebody else to support her. Does that make sense?
Yeah, this is what I tried a couple of days ago. I tried to pair her with a less advanced student, so that she could speak more and explain more to the students. And I think it's worked perfectly well.
Okay, so just keep maybe build on that then, because I think it does sound like she needs a lot of confidence building. So give plenty of praise and encouragement, and also sort of develop responsibility slowly, so that she can feel that she can do things without relying on her friends.
Okay, thank you very much.
Great.
Maybe we could put that question to the floor.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Great minds, because there's lots of teachers here on this webinar, so I didn't know if somebody's had a similar experience and they could share what they did to help their students. Someone that was lacking confidence. I find, you know, usually lots of ideas, lots of brains together comes up with some really interesting methods. Would anybody like to share?
I had a young man in one of my classes who came with his sister, and actually she was probably a higher level than him, although she was a lot younger. And he constantly looked to one of the other teachers in the class who was an Arabic speaker for exactly the same thing, constantly wanted things to be translated, and then would reply in Arabic. To the point that I actually thought he was having a real difficulty learning. And then we were all asked to do a week of assessment. And I was absolutely astounded by his abilities when he was actually just asked to sit and concentrate and do his own work. So that's what I figured it was about, confidence building, because his understanding clearly was very high, as was his written language and his spoken word. I don't know, sometimes people worry about saying the wrong thing or getting the answers wrong. So I guess if you try and, you know, explain to the class that you have to make mistakes in order to learn, you know, that it's a good thing if they're making mistakes because it means they're trying. I don't know if that helps, but it is very frustrating.
I think as well, because of the different cultures and that you will have, in many countries, making mistakes is deemed to be
A loss of face almost, isn't it?
Yeah, loss of face, or it's just not what's expected.
Yeah.
So getting over that hurdle, and especially if you're doing more interactive learning, a lot of education around the world is still very, very formal, and teacher talks and students listen, and that will be also, you know, you've got to overcome that in order to get them to feel confident and relaxed. So yeah, it's difficult, and especially with the mix of different cultures, can be dynamic, but it can also cause its difficulties as well. So yeah. Anything more from anybody? Okay, well, I'll hand back to Colette then for now. I think I've done enough talking for the moment.
So thank you everybody for attending, and thank you Jacqui for hosting the webinar. There were some really nice comments in the chat, you know, saying thank you, it was really interesting and learned a lot. So that's really, really great. Before you all disappear, please take a moment to do the evaluation form. I know we don't like doing them, but it really helps me to see what you like and what you don't like about the webinars we host, and also gives me some ideas for future webinars. And also one more thing, we have a webinar coming up soon on child protection, about how to create child protection policies and ensuring that they are implemented correctly. And Andrew, who is actually on this webinar, will be hosting that. Like Jacqui, he's got many years of experience creating child protection policies. So that will be coming up. We need to confirm the date.
Yeah.
It'll be coming up soon. So yeah, that's everything. And thank you very much. Please get in touch with myself or with Jacqui if you have any more questions or queries. Or if you'd like to learn more about how Refugee Ed can support your organisation, we're here to support you. So in any way that could happen, let me know. And as they say these days, stay safe. I know that's a massive cliche, but yeah, stay safe and keep well and healthy. All the best, guys. Thank you very much.
Yes, all the very best. It's been a pleasure sharing that with you. So yeah, thanks very much, everybody. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks. George has got a better one. Keep smiling. Yes, that's more positive. I like it. Bye, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.